Welcome to Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers. Journey with us as we navigate the winding path into plant-related careers with professionals who have taken root or are still branching out. I'm Megan Wiesbrook.
And I'm Jessica Turner-Scoff.
In this season of Planted, we are exploring the fields of opportunity associated with plant-focused STEM careers. That's right, all the cool industries and places you can work with plants.
And what better way to branch out than learn more about a career that inspires communities to plant trees? Our guest today works with trees daily to coordinate healthier and greener neighborhoods, especially throughout Chicago. It is our very own outreach assistant at the Chicago Region Trees Initiative, Colette Copic. Colette, thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us and telling us a little bit about your career journey.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to have any excuse to talk more about building community through trees.
So on every episode of Planted, we like to take 3 random-ish things and have our guests tell us a story of how they connect. So that being said, can you tell us how theater, crayfish, and coffee are all related to you?
Yeah, well, first I want to start off by saying that I haven't always worked with trees, and I was actually a theater kid in high school and had absolutely no interest in science or conservation at the time. I used to go to theater camp, and that was all outdoors. I loved being outside. I loved telling stories and building community. It wasn't until college where I realized I could do all those things if I pursued more opportunities in the environmental field. Later on, I decided to join an aquatic invasive species lab at my university and got to assist on a project focused on removing invasive crayfish from canals around Chicago. This is where I realized my love of science. It was so much fun to learn how to drive boats and study these creatures that I had never really interacted with. It was also cool to learn about the landscape and how much wildlife the city and suburban environments can actually support. It was really surprising. But one of the things that I love about being outside is how nature can impact communities and potentially bring them together, which is something that at least this particular research didn't really have. I then got involved in a lot of different local initiatives in my community, most of which started with getting coffee and talking with a lot of different people about what they wanted to see in their neighborhood or what they wanted from our civic leaders. And that brings me to my current position at Chicago Region Trees Initiative, or CRTI, where we're trying to get creative on how we engage communities to plant more trees to benefit both communities and the wildlife.
Well, full disclosure, I am one of Colette's hiring managers, and I remember when they came in for an interview, I contacted Megan afterwards, and I'm like, oh my gosh, they would be perfect for a podcast episode of Planted. I mean, Colette, you just have such great energy. You're super fun and so knowledgeable. We are delighted to have you here on Planted, so let's get started.
Well, you have a really interesting background with aquatic species research, which I would assume were the rusties. Is that the...
Yes, rusty crayfish.
Yes, they are cuties. But
what do they look like?
They have like a little, well, you can probably describe them better than I can, but they have like a little reddish brown spot on their side. So you can kind of
almost looks like a little rusty spot.
Oh, that's so cute.
They're invasive, but I do think that they're pretty cute.
I do love little snappy crustaceans. I really do.
Yes. So between rusties as well as forest restoration and community outreach, can you kind of tell us how this led to your role with Community and Trees?
Yeah. I live in the city of Chicago, so like I said, I've always loved the outdoors, and living in this highly developed environment was, let's just say, interesting for me. It was pretty challenging. I found myself just searching for any wildlife out there, big or small. But what I discovered was there's a lot of life to appreciate and to study and connect with out there. So in school, I was doing aquatic species research by trapping invasive crayfish in nearby rivers around Chicago. And on the weekends, I got really into walking in the local forest preserves, hiking and doing plant identification. I tried to learn as much about the landscape as possible through that. And last summer, I actually got to work within those forest preserves doing restoration work. And for those that don't know, restoration work involves removing invasive plants like buckthorn so that native trees and native plants can have a better chance at surviving for future generations. I got to lead an awesome crew last summer doing this work, and it made me a lot more interested in forestry and how we can bring the life of the forest to more developed places like the cities and suburbs.
For listeners who are interested in more information about restoration work or what some of that looks like, we also have a guest from season 1 who talks a lot about natural areas, restoration, and is currently now is a member of the Chicago Region Trees Initiative. So
and Colette's other boss.
Correct. So, but Trinity Pierce, in her role at the time when she was on the podcast, was in natural areas restoration. And now she works in a similar role of managing a lot of this work with communities around trees. But if anybody's interested in learning more about some of that work, I would definitely recommend checking out that episode from season 1.
Well, and you're cracking me up here because I was going to mention season 2. Julie Travellini talked a lot about little nature and big nature, that you can always find nature no matter where you are. And I know that, I live in downtown Chicago, and I have definitely seen coyotes. And once in my park, a scarlet tanager, which was very exciting. So it's just, taking an interest, opening your eyes, getting out a guidebook, and looking around.
Yeah.
So
life is all around us.
It is. So I really appreciate that comment for sure. But, if we can go back to, I guess, the topic at hand, don't get me too excited talking about nature. But what's been your motivation to work in the area of community organization? I mean, what does that industry look like?
Yeah, well, what I like about this work is it connects people from all different backgrounds to build the world we want to see moving forward.
Oh, beautiful.
And one of the things that surprised me about this work is how creative it is. In school, I got the impression that adults already knew how to do everything in a job. I assumed you already knew, or you already had to know the way in order to work things out. But what I learned is the work is figuring it out.
Oh, nice.
The work is building the road to figuring out what that solution is. So, and of course, while incorporating and listening to a bunch of different perspectives as much as you can. So that's what I'm really trying to do. And it's really cool to see how the work can shift and change the more people we learned from.
I think that's such a cool analogy of like building the road to the solution. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the communities you've worked with historically, and how does your passion for community connect with your work with trees?
Yeah, I feel so fortunate to have gone to meet some just really cool people. I've gone to work with community gardens, environmental justice groups, housing justice groups, park districts, schools, and my passion for communities certainly is connected to the work with trees. And building a community can look so different based on what the goal actually is. And so it's really important for me as a representative of an organization to know that not everyone is as excited about trees as I am, if it's going to be a part of the solution. In fact, with many of the people and communities I work with, trees might be far down on the list of their neighborhood priorities. And that makes sense. That's okay. But the most important part about building community to me is remaining open and listening and seeing if trees can fit in somehow. Listening is probably the most important aspect of the job, and not assuming what certain groups of people want out of a project. Many other people have better ideas than I about what their community needs, and I see my role as opening that space, or just listening into the space that maybe they've already created and learning from that, and using what I know about the benefits of trees and seeing where there's alignment in other people's goals.
Yeah, that's just such a great point. And I love that it's listening and understanding that people know their situation better than you can. And then figuring out what that community prioritizes. And, not to keep plugging the trees, but that's what we do. The benefits of trees, they're so vast that they really can help in so many different ways. Everything from removing air pollution, which is linked to a whole host of health issues, improving mental health, creating habitat for other wildlife and plants, helping support food security. Having an orchard can be a great way in areas that might be a food desert. So it's really cool that we're able to, you're in your role to help link those benefits to the communities based on their priorities. Now, let's chat a little bit about your current role. You're being funded through an Institute of Museum and Library Services grant, IMLS, and this position is to help to get trees in the communities that need them the most in the Chicago region. It also is to encourage a next-generation museum worker because we are an outdoor living tree museum. So, but in this role, Colette, you are working with the Chicago Region Trees Initiative and ARBNet. Can you talk a little bit about these two programs and how you link them and what your current role is?
Yeah. So the goal of Chicago Region Trees Initiative is to increase the trees in spaces where there might already be a lot of humans around, like neighborhood streets or schools or community gardens. It's almost kind of like sharing the arboretum with communities through tree plantings. And again, sharing all the benefits of those trees. So we acquire the trees and help organize the planting, but I learn a lot from the expertise of community members too, about their land, their community, and their history in the neighborhood. And what I like about it is it gets the people that actually live around these spaces involved in the planning process and in learning about trees, both of which can build community within the neighborhood itself and between organizations. And so then where there's interest, my role is to help community groups establish their own arboretums through ARBNet. ARBNet is the international network of arboretums around the world. Yeah, it's kind of cool.
Super cool. Super cool. And we're not biased at all.
Right. You don't have to be a big arboretum like Morton Arboretum to be considered one. In fact, your neighborhood block could become an arboretum if you have all the right criteria. Your community garden, all these spaces that have trees could become accredited arboretums if you have enough trees and a bit of community teamwork. So my goal with ARBNet is kind of to, branch out the museum world and make it more accessible so that many different groups can benefit from this accreditation program.
I will say, too, I'm so excited that this episode gets to highlight ARBNet and kind of talk about that.
It's such a great
program as well. This year, the Arboretum is celebrating its centennial. And so Colette and Jessica and Trinity and CRTI and the Arboretum as a whole is doing a lot of tree plantings throughout the Chicago region. And in education, we're doing one with a high school specifically. And this high school teacher has spent the last several years that she's been teaching there, like planting trees in what she calls her arboretum. And so there's a variety of different tree species, but we're doing a planting at their site, and we're able to she's really close to like the number of diverse trees that she needs in order to qualify as a level 1 accredited arboretum. So we're, as part of that planting, going to be also accrediting that school site as an arboretum. But the whole process is, I just think it's interesting that like there are cemeteries that are arboretum, or whole towns sometimes can be accredited as an arboretum.
Totally.
It's a really neat resource that I think I don't want to say goes untapped, but it's nice to be able to highlight it in this conversation and also in the podcast.
Yeah, it's a huge global network. And what I really appreciate from the school perspective is it can create like a living laboratory. There's such an emphasis on that right now. And it's really amazing. I mean, if you dive into the research, how much trees can benefit, like controlling for other variables like kids' education plans, their grades, their motivation in school. I mean, it's just awesome that that's happening. And so highly recommend our listeners check out the bonus content that we will have, because it will have accreditation information. So check out that in the bonus content.
So, Colette, you've gotten to work on a lot of different kinds of projects. I'm sure there's been some really challenging ones, but also some really rewarding ones. Can you talk about what have been some of the aspects of your career that have been specifically more challenging and also more rewarding in the same way?
Yeah. Most challenging aspect, I would say, is feeling like you have to stick to one thing. As you can tell already from my background, I have jumped around quite a bit, from being on a boat to being in a forest to wanting to be on stage, all kinds of things. But I see that as a strength. I know how to talk to scientists. I know how to talk to land managers, to community organizers. I still have a lot to learn, and I've learned so much from the people I've worked with. But I realize it's okay to explore. It's okay to step away from something that wasn't quite the right fit. And it doesn't mean that the people you met aren't still a part of your network. In fact, you never know when you'll meet someone again and connect over a different project later down the line.
So true.
Yeah, and that's probably the most rewarding aspect of my experiences is just I've gotten to learn from some really awesome people that also just want to make the world more environmentally just.
Colette, it's so wonderful to hear you talk about how some of your experiences, tell you all the things that you like and all the things that, maybe you'll know are a challenge. We hear that a lot of times when we interview different professionals that, sometimes you learn as much in the ways that you are really enjoying a role or a job as well as, things that you maybe want to, you don't like as much. You learn in both types of scenarios. We also shared your profile, some background on you with some of our educators and teachers who, are also listeners of this podcast. And, wanted to give them a chance that if they got the opportunity to sit down with you, what they would ask. So one of their questions was, what does your day-to-day look like?
Well, what I like about this work is that every day looks totally different depending on the day and season. And it's just very tied to the outdoors overall. But for the most part, I'm building relationships with community members by attending town halls, doing site visits, going to community meetings and events, all to figure out where there's alignment in what we do and what other groups are doing, and seeing if there's any room for collaboration. Obviously, wanting to do a tree planting together would be awesome, or maybe some educational programming. And then in the spring and fall, my team and I are very busy planting trees all over the Chicago region. And just shout out to my CRTI team. They work so hard, and it's a nice mix of getting to work outside and inside.
I really appreciate hearing from both you and Megan talking about, figuring out what you like, what you don't like, that versatility in a career, in a day-to-day experience. I mean, that's something that I love about my own position is every day is different. It's just one of the great things about working in this industry. But, you do have that underlying education that you've had to help build this up. So can you talk a little bit about how you picked an undergraduate major and, how did you pick a graduate school? How did you even decide to go to graduate school?
Yeah, I've had quite the journey of self-discovery in high school and college. And honestly, for most of my life, I felt a lot of pressure to take a very traditional career path or make decisions that weren't necessarily everything that I wanted. I thought I was going to be a lawyer for a long time. I thought you had to be a certain kind of person to be interested in or good at science. And it turns out I was wrong about that. What really matters is if you're curious and interested in something enough. I pursued a field tech position in that aquatic invasive species lab my senior year of college. I just got a call within me to seek out this professor and ask if I could work in his lab. And later on, a year later, I was about to graduate and he offered a graduate researcher position to me. So from there, I got to work on a bunch of different projects, both in the lab and out in the field. And then I also sought out more roles in my own neighborhood by getting more involved in my community through activism and environmental justice. I have really enjoyed all the different kinds of experiences I've had, and they've definitely made me a more well-rounded person. And now I use all those skills I got in my undergrad and my graduate school, the people skills, the science skills, and I take them into my outreach position at Chicago Region Trees Initiative, which is what I love about it.
So I know you've talked a lot about community activism, environmental justice. Can you share a little bit, maybe some advice or some ways that our listeners could get involved in their communities if this is something they're interested in too?
Totally. Well, the first thing I'll say is whatever issue you care about, chances are somebody else cares about it too. And so the first step I would say is exploring, finding anyone around you that also cares about what you care about, or finding a group that is already doing the work that you want to do. So that's the first step. The second step is actually being brave enough to introduce yourself and ask how you can help. People really like hearing that you care about what they care about. And it definitely takes a lot of courage to put yourself out there, but it can be really rewarding when building community around you and just learning from people that might already be doing similar work.
That's very cool. And I love how you talk about being brave enough, because that's something that, it does take a lot of courage to go after your dreams and to go after things that interest you. And, I really appreciate that your entire career path has been built on that bravery, going from what was traditionally expected, what you thought you were going to do, and then, taking that chance to work in that as that field tech position your senior year. It's just great. And it's, as always, I love seeing when skills build up over the years. And it's just really cool that you do have those people skills, you have the science skills, and you are connecting those to the communities around you. Now, speaking of connecting communities, a great resource that people can use to connect with the trees in their communities is the Canopy Counts program. They're the Curio XYZ app. So be sure to check out our bonus content. Can you talk a little bit more about that app and that program?
Yeah, well, one of the really important things that we're working on at CRTI is knowing what is out there. We want to know, what tree species do we already have planted? What do you have in your backyard? What tree do you have in your park? So to try and find out, we have what we call the Canopy Counts program. It's a really cool program that helps people track trees and plantable spaces across the entire world and learn about the benefits provided by those trees. It's accessible through the mobile app called Curio XYZ, and it's awesome because anyone interested can add trees from their neighborhood or adopt a few trees and create updates every year to watch the trees grow. There's also a super cool stories component of the app, which provides space for uploading pictures of the trees and plantable spaces in your community and using that to advocate for more trees. So I'll include an info sheet for listeners if they're interested in learning more. But yeah, using this app is super helpful for us to inform our plantings, because how are we supposed to know what trees we should plant if we don't already know what's out there? So it gives us a more clear picture about what's needed and what's possible on the landscape.
And labeling your trees is one of the steps to become an accredited arboretum. And you can use the app for that. So just a little plug. You started out wanting to be a lawyer, and then you had this braided river of experience that led you into community building. Now, I imagine you will continue your trajectory of your career since you are a young professional. And so where do you see yourself in, 20 some years? What does that look like to you, do you think?
Yeah, I'm just getting started. I see my career as a continuation of all the interpretive skills from science, from community activism and collaboration, to hopefully put me in a role where I can use all of these skills together. As you can tell, I like to be right at the intersection between academic research and community application for environmental solutions. But I want to be open too. I might receive other callings. But as of now, in the future, I hope to make it into a role where I am carrying out conservation work alongside communities. And I use conservation work as a broad term, and just do work that is informed by science and all social perspectives.
Well, Colette, we have one last question for you. And
it's a hard one.
I was going to preface that it's a tough one, but it is one that we ask all of our guests. And I know you get to plant a lot of different types of trees throughout the region, but can you tell us what your favorite plant is?
This might be a cliche at the Morton Arboretum, but truthfully, it's the bur oak. I even have a tattoo of a bur oak leaf on my arm. I love their spiky acorns, and they provide so much for other species. And to me, they have a symbolic significance too. So when oak leaves fall in autumn, you may know they tend to burn well, better than some other tree leaves. And this is a really important process for plants around it on the prairie, because fire can make room for new growth and help with seed germination of other plants. And I love this idea because it reminds me that it's okay to burn past perceptions you had of the world, of yourself, in order to grow and create something new. And so I just love the role that oaks play in that natural process. And they're just beautiful trees. And I'm sure plenty of people have their own beloved meanings of the bur oak.
Well, for me, it just seems like such a fitting tree for you, since bur oaks are, in the prairie savanna, they build the community around them. And that is what you do. So it's just like it's a perfect fit, if I do say so. Colette, thank you for all of the work that you do. It's been really interesting hearing about your rich and vibrant career and just how you take on all these challenges and make it your own. We really appreciate you taking the time today to talk to us. I know we mentioned this earlier in the episode. Colette's role, including this interview, is part of a larger project at the Morton Arboretum to connect communities to trees and support the development of arboreta in urban environments. This project is made possible by a grant from the U.S. Institute of Museum and Library Services. Grant number ARPML-250622-OMLS-22. This episode of Planted, Finding Your Roots in STEM Careers, was made possible by the Morton Arboretum and the Multimedia Services at College of DuPage. Check out additional resources and bonus content at www.mortonarb.org/plantedpodcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, like, and share. This is Jessica Turner-Scoff
and Megan Wiesbrook,
and we hope you'll continue to join us as we journey into STEM careers.